Alright, this was the official start to the playoffs because it was all about the star power and trying to create advantages through them, but the one the Grizz didn't exploit enough was their size. With Jimmy assigned to Edey, they should have just post-dumped non-stop because that forced the Dubs to double every time, so that's an easy kick out for him to play on the catch, but they only find him on rolls, drop-offs, or lobs, and he's really just a no-board bot. Without a real inside presence from him, it basically requires Ja and Dez to do that, and to generate everything on offense, so the two were always getting downhill, especially in transition, because both of them kept taking advantage of the Dubs defense not being set. Even the others were just as aggressive, so the Dubs struggled to contain the rock, and really didn't have a first line at all, but that aggression didn't always lead to a bucket, because they did run into severe turnover issues. The Dubs were at least consistent with their shows and low rotations, so whenever the Grizz ran into a lot of traffic in those driving lanes, they either lost the rock or got it picked off, and those turnovers compounding throughout the first half hurt him bad. Those kept leading to runouts for Jimmy, but he was hurting him just as much in the half court, because with Edey assigned to him, he actually exploited that matchup, and it was the same whenever it was Aldama, so he was either pulling over top, touching paint to score a dime, or was using his gravity to find cutters on the backside. Even Gary got to exploit Edey because he was sagging off him just as much, and if anything, the Grizz were off the Dubs' bodies a lot, so they paid for it. The only one that was really body to body was Pippen, because as expected, he was delegated to Steph duty, and without Jalen Wells to stagger his minutes with, those cheap fouls he kept picking up from being physical hurt him even more. But those whistles were really a big part of the Dubs surviving the third, because once the Grizz decided to incorporate their bigs, it was no surprise it led to their best quarter, and they kept drawing two whenever they went inside, or was finding them for easy finishes. Some of it was even coming from Dez, because the Dubs were showing or even blitzing off his screens to prevent him from getting a clean look, and that just opened up the pocket for the backside advantage. But he was still getting his, because whenever they got to a 50-50, he converted every single time, and he was a big reason for him running it back to make it a game of buckets in the fourth. That entire quarter was just him and Ja taking over, so he just continued doing the same thing, and Ja was exploiting any of the Dubs' bigs coverages, or was just hunting Steph to get that matchup, because the Dubs were conceding the switch. But unfortunately, they never got their turnovers under control, and even worse, they couldn't contain Steph long enough, because same as the Clips game, playoff Jimmy held it down through three, then he came around down the wire with his shot making. Some of it did stem from the Grizzlies' adjustment to assign Bane onto Jimmy at some point in the third, because he didn't have the same advantages as he did earlier, so that required him to go to Steph, and they were able to free him up off the rock. A couple came off of Waze, one came off of Spanulis, and they went to a two-man game with him and Jimmy, because Pippen was never going to switch that, but that did lead to a turnover late that could have cost them, until the Grizz gave it right back in the last 5 seconds. For some reason, there was just no sense of urgency on their final inbound, so by the time Aldama had an outlet for Bane coming off a flare in the deep corner, their 5 seconds was up, and it was only fitting that's how they lost in the end. Just watch the tape.
Gets it out to Morant.
5 seconds.
5-second violation. They could not inbound.